Yes, well, it's an organisation that began in 1996, really to address some of the, I guess, persistent racial inequalities, particularly in regards to stop and search, criminal justice, but also unemployment, health, a whole range of issues. And what we decided in 1996 when we launched is that to address these issues, we needed political power. Not to ask for change, but to demand it. And we began, if you like, a civil rights movement here in the UK that would register African, Asian, Caribbeans and other minorities to vote, and to vote with a voice that would ask for social and racial justice. And in many respects we changed the landscape. The narrative changed from demonising black people to win votes to, I guess, courting the black vote, albeit one might say in often a superficial way. But it was a game changer. We now see many more black politicians, ministers, cabinet members as a direct result.
And can you talk a little bit about the sorts of strategies that you use to get your message out?
Yes. I mean, I think that our strategy back then was really to excite a community, that we could make a difference. I mean, there was a perception out there that these things happened to us and we couldn't do much about it. It's their institutions, they're the politicians, and regardless of the moral or equality agenda, we could do little to change things. And what we demonstrated was back then, as is now, is that in over 100 seats, the BME vote, black and minority ethnic vote, we call it black, political black, but the black vote could change, be the deciding factor in all of those seats. And with that, you could have a political clout to demand changes in those particular areas.
So I know, just from looking at your website, you do things like shadowing, MPs and these sorts of things. Are they some of your core activities? Or?
Well, it's interesting that you should say that, because clearly when we began, it was all about voter registration. The 1997 election, very historic, important election, and that was our focus. But after the election, it dawned upon us that clearly the type of change that we needed, we had to focus much more than just voting. So we began, if you like, a 20-year strategy. And the three pillars of that strategy were political education. We recognised that our communities needed to understand the democratic institutions, know how they work, know how they can be influenced. Not just community centres, the voters, but also university students, college students, school children. The political education was critical, and with that captive audience you could inspire too, so that was part of that. The second pillar was participation, voter registration, voting, engaging in the kind of conversations that were happening on many political levels. We needed to have our say. And the third element was representation. We argued, as we argue now, that anywhere there are decisions that affect our lives, we ought to be around the political table. So, the mentoring schemes that you highlighted have been very, very instructive in nurturing the next generation of leaders. And people like Helen Grant, the first conservative female of African descent, came from one of those schemes. Saida Varsi, she was part of the campaign back in the late 90s, and now they're in high office. And in the criminal justice system, there are nearly 100 black and minority ethnic magistrates that have come through from scratch, now dispensing justice. What we did with these mentoring, shadowing programs, we said, first and foremost, you can be brilliant, and then show them the way that they can actually be brilliant. By education, by nurturing, by guiding on that personal development, that would get them into a seat of power.
Yeah. So do those programs continue?
Well, unfortunately, all of these programs, or at least most of them, have been dependent upon funding.
Yeah, sure.
And that most of the funding for these programs has been cut, which is a shame, because it's a shame we no longer run an MP shadowing scheme, or a magistrate scheme. We do run a number of leadership programs, local authority leadership programs. We have one in Tower Hamlets, another in Wolverhampton and Birmingham.
Yeah.
The response is always fantastic, I have to say. We do a call out for young leaders, the next generation of decision makers, and they come good. If we had £10 million to do what we do, you would see a transformation in every public body, and perhaps every private sector company too, because we know we need greater representation there too. Yeah.
So, given you've raised the cuts, have they, obviously they have affected you quite
shockingly.
Profoundly,
We've been shockingly affected by the cuts. I mean, look, our project is about governance. And so one would expect the government and local governments to back us to the hilt. And, sadly that's not the case. And so we have to look at new ways that we can enhance civil society and democracy with the work that we do. Yeah.
So I imagine that's one of the main challenges that you face now in this
austerity
climate.
No, but it is. I mean, look, we want to do more than survive. We want to thrive. We want our communities to be inspired. But we're a threadbare team. You've met some of our fantastic volunteers that come and help us, and what we hope with our volunteers that come to Operation Blackboat is that they get frontline experience. They're not just stuffing envelopes, although there's that to be done as well. Yeah. But they become writers. Yeah. They become researchers. They become analysts that are able to look at the political spectrum and make these judgment calls. And many of them go off to do fantastic things, which is great. We give to them, they give to us. Yeah, sure. Society benefits. Yeah.
So you've had a series of interns over the years?
Over the years. I mean, literally hundreds, I would say.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And some of them now are in high office. One young woman, Jyoti Bajani, she's now working for Gordon Brown. Okay. There's others in Parliament, others in public service, as senior civil servants. Jasvinder Sangari, who she's the woman that is at the front line of honour killings. She was an alumni, if you like. So there's some good people out there. Yeah. And they stay connected. We're a family.
So do you consider that internship as part of
the project?
Your goals? Yeah.
It's part of the project. Yeah. It's nurturing talent. It's staying as a family. It's something that we treasure because it's a good feeling when somebody comes to work and they say this is more than a 9 to 5. Yeah. I feel that I'm contributing. Yeah. I feel that I'm developing, and we're proud of that aspect. I mean, we don't do these things for award, but we get awards for nurturing talent. The real key, though, is these individuals making a wonderful difference.
Yeah. Just to go back perhaps a little bit to some of the things you were talking about before, what are some of the things that you count as successes over the years for OBB?
Sure, that's a good question. I mean, I think that a clear success would be the face of Westminster since we began. When we began, there was 4 black and minority MPs, and now there are 27. Perhaps equally significant was the conversation and transition within the Conservative Party. When we began, there were none, then there are 2. And we kept telling the Conservative Party, look, actually there are a lot of black Conservatives with a small c, conservative in many ways. Ask yourself why our communities don't vote for you. And they said, why? And we said, well, 1, you have 0 representation, you have policies that don't reflect their concerns, and you often have this nasty party rhetoric. I've noted all these down. I think a lot of those things that we mentioned, they're dealt with. And as a result, they made the biggest increase of any political party in this country in regards to BME representation. They went from 2 to 12. I'm hoping now they won't take their foot off the gas and say, we're done with that. But, you know, one of the beneficiaries of that push, we've seen Sam Gimia, and anytime any of young people out there watch Prime Minister's Question Time, have a look who's always behind the Prime Minister, taking his notes, making sure that he says the right thing, going on trips abroad. Sam Gimia, young black man, working class kid, who did well at school, and now he is the eyes and ears of our Prime Minister. I mean, you know, that is some success. It's not our success, it's the nation's success.
Yeah.
We've played but a small role in creating the climate for Sam to flourish.
So I imagine it's very important that you take a bipartisan sort of approach.
It is for us. Yeah. No, but it is for us. We are vociferously non-partisan because we want all the mainstream parties. We don't want the British National Party or the EDL. We feel that they're racist, they're bigots, and undermine our democracy. But the mainstream political parties, we want them to be inclusive, representative, and look like the people they seek to serve.
Yeah, sure. And what kind of relationships do you have with the mainstream parties?
We have good relationships. We can call up and have conversations. They often come to us if they've got some policies they think the black community want to hear. Because we're independent, we can vociferously challenge them when we feel that they're veering to the right on immigration, when they're slacking on representation, when they're not doing enough to tackle the inequality, the race inequality divide, which we think at the moment is occurring. The austerities are hitting black people disproportionately worse. And we'll let them know. Moreover, we'll let them know there's a race political penalty, that black people will not vote for these parties if they're not seen to be addressing these issues. Why should they?
Yeah. Are those relationships with the mainstream parties difficult to manage? I mean,
it's a high wire act. It's a high wire act. Yeah. Look, when you consider that still the majority of black people vote Labour, it will be an easy call to say, well, Operation Black Vote's a Labour front. And we make that thrown at us all the time. But if that was the case, why are the only two female ministers from Operation Black Vote? So, you know, we have to be aware of the accusations made to us. You know, sometimes we often go the other way to counter those. But we know why we're here. And we'll face down the Labour Party when they say, you know, why are you talking to them when they do this? We talk to mainstream parties to get them all in a better place. I think we've done that. We in terms of policy, we get the Lib Dems in a better place, but in terms of representation, we're still struggling. To date, there are no black BME Lib Dem MPs, and we won't rest telling them that they're in a poor place.
Yeah. So I imagine they're responsive to that kind of message, but do you know about their problems in recruitment, or I mean, is this something they talk to you about? Or?
Of course they do, and they can give me 101 excuses. I say to them, bottom line is political will. It's down to the man or woman or men and women in charge. So no excuses, deliver. You want support, we'll give it to you. You want help, we'll do that too. No more excuses.
Yeah, so you think they are just excuses?
Well, they are. Yeah. I absolutely know they are.
Yeah.
Clearly there are priorities, and if this is not a priority, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What about, so you've talked about some of the successes. What about some of the failures? Have there been things that have been less effective or not working?
Well, I'm frustrated. We're nearly 20 years old, and we're still tackling persistent race inequality. The trouble is, of course, is that we can do what we do, but when we get squeezed in terms of our workforce, in terms of our delivery capability. That's frustrating. It's equally frustrating when we make progress. You see that race equality is on the agenda. We've got the best, or we had the best legislation, I would argue, in the modern world. And then all those gains are beginning to be rowed back. Race equality is off the agenda. The rise of Islamophobia, xenophobia, and you're thinking, gosh, it makes you aware that you cannot rest. That by whether by default you don't have the people power, or you take the foot off the gas, all the gains that you made can quickly be rolled back. I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
I see the frustrating thing for us is that we see such great potential. Great potential actually for everyone.
Yeah.
Not just for our communities, but for society, for politics, for business. And I get frustrated that they can't see it as clear as we can. And worse still, that when some of their actions quash a lot of people's spirit, quash potential, that's when I move from frustration to anger. The challenge is for me and others who feel this way is how do we challenge that anger?
Yeah.
And I would argue that we redouble our efforts and get into a position where we're not asking for to be listened to or for change. We're demanding it. And they say, no, we're not discussing it anymore. These are the demands. If you don't, we'll make sure that your political position is not in a good position. That's all we can do. That's what we can do as Democrats.
So, and this is a personal question, so feel free not to answer it, but does that frustration overwhelm you at times, or, I mean, how do you manage that personally?
Sure. I think it's the history of, if you like, the black struggle, that you manage it. I mean, some days you feel, oh gosh, put your head in your hands, maybe drink one or two whiskies too many, but the next day you pick yourself up and you say, right, okay, bring it on.
Back to it, yeah.
Back to it. And we've always had a very good team. I mean, our Deputy Director, Francine Fernandez, and all the way along with our volunteers, there's a spirit. Yeah. There's a great spirit. And, we've had our peaks and troughs when we have, let's say, our 15th anniversary or international guest speaker, and so we enjoy that celebration when that happens. But when the chips are down, you will see a tight team that never throws in the towel.
Yeah.
That just says, look, we'll do this. And I'm upset that it's tough. It's been tough for so long. And we're not martyrs, by the way.
No.
We're just committed. And we'll get there.
Yeah. Earlier you were sort of alluding to the cynicism, the political cynicism amongst BME communities. Can you talk a bit about that and the ways you might try and work at overcoming that?
Well, I mean, first of all, we need to acknowledge the cynicism right across the board.
Yeah.
And particularly with young people. But that's magnified with young black people for a whole range of reasons. What many perceive as the harassment by the police in stop and search. The fact that young graduates are twice as likely not to get a job. There's a frustration. Hang on a second. What are these people doing for us? Where some say, right, I'm doing it for myself, and some go off to criminality and say, no, that's their survival. We don't like it, we don't condone it, but that's their own mechanism. And others are not there, but in another place, consumed with cynicism. What we've got to do is we try to do on the streets in colleges and say, look, actually, that's how they want you to behave. Our detractors want us to disengage, because they don't have to deal with us in a equitable way, because we're not voting, we're not participating. And if they portray us as criminals and we behave like criminals, it becomes a self-fulfilling. So we've got to get that message over to them and say our history is stronger than that. And there is a route out, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot have that conversation in 2 minutes when their life has seen little opportunity and a lot of negativity, I mean, oppression is probably too strong a word, but it is an oppression of the spirit, and often of opportunities. Now, it takes a lot to shake somebody out of that mindset. So we confront that, but also we want to show them with those that are not there, those that are perhaps over here, and help them become successful. Because if they become successful, they will see them in these positions and say, maybe I can do that too.
Yeah. And just, you talked about this earlier, using the word black in a political sense. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that. Is that, do you find that, people from different ethnic minority backgrounds maybe don't identify with that? Does it resonate with the community?
Well, I guess I'm a throwback really from the 70s and 80s where in this country in particular there was a wonderful articulation that says that understood racism and its dynamics as particularly tackling non-white people. So there was a golden thread running through what was occurring, and what we had in common was non-white. And so this non-white then was politically black.
Yeah.
How do we confront this societal disadvantage? We do it by coming together. And then as in now, the term black is a term of strength. Seen, it wasn't not necessarily black power, but that was part of the narrative that you were kicking back, fighting back. And of course within that you had your different identities, African, Asian, Caribbean, all the different religions, different cultures. So you could have all of those, but you could come together under this political banner. That lasted very strong, perhaps until 9/11. And then the 9/11 threw the communities apart. The focus on Muslim communities meant one of two things. One, the attack on Muslims said, we're proud to be Muslims, we're not anybody else, we're Muslims. Some of the other communities said, we're not Muslims, we're Hindus, we're Sikhs. And so that old chestnut that has riven nations and peoples apart begun its course again. We still hang on to it and we articulate it to the extent that we can go to, let's say, Chinese communities, Turkish communities and say, look, you may have a problem with the term black, but we are including you in this empowerment project. Their response is, where do I sign?
Yeah, okay, so it's a positive response then.
Once it's explained,
where
do I sign? You're on our side. And then of course, it's very powerful when you have a black man or black woman saying to a Chinese community, a Chinese audience, that your struggle is my struggle. Why isn't there a person of Chinese descent in the House of Westminster? Why? Why do Roma have no rights, very few white rights or respect in this country? Why? My struggle is your struggle. They say, where do we sign?
Yeah. And I imagine it's a similar kind of education process, if you like, with a younger generation who don't remember that kind of unified sense of political black.
Well, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge, politicising young people, period. We live in a Big Brother, X Factor world in which the individual is king for less than a day. And so to get people into a space which says, I understand this, I understand why we ought to be unified. And of course, if you're a group of young black men and women in a white group, how do you say to them, oh, I'm with this black politics? They want to belong too. So we have to find a way to say you can be both.
Yeah.
And you can have supporters and allies in what we call the anti-racist struggle. So clearly white people can be part of the anti-racist struggle. What we find unacceptable is if white people lead the anti-racist struggle. It's a bit like it will be like if men led the gender struggle.
Yeah.
Be a bit odd.
Yeah. Bit inappropriate.
A bit inappropriate.
Yeah.
But and we smile and laugh, but actually there are lots of white people that want to lead the anti-racist struggle or the black empowerment struggle. I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Let's support one another. Let's be shoulder to shoulder. But those that are subject to it are best placed to lead it.
Yeah. Have you noticed a shift in the potential to politicise young people with the onset of the austerity measures, and
sure,
has that made any difference? Or?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that there is a conversation about inequality, about disproportionality, and particularly around education. Actually, what I worry about, that it becomes single issue. That, single issue is you do that and then that's it. It's all over. It rarely spreads to a broader conversation about politics and about the world. And so students will go to the streets about their education, quite rightly. But then once that's gone, it's back to Big Brother.
Yeah. So keeping them engaged.
Well, precisely because that it's not necessarily accompanied with a movement or a broader philosophy of tackling injustice, the single issue campaigns. But nevertheless, they have their place.
Yeah.
They have their place. I think it's for us older ones to kind of say, there's a link here, and here, and here.
Yeah. So do you find that in the work of OBV that you get a momentum around a particular issue and then it will dissipate once that might have been resolved?
Sometimes there can be a single issue, but we're very clear about that. You use that as a stepping stone, as a platform. And so if there's a particular campaign which we had just after Christmas, keeping Mary Seacole and Olaido Equiana on the national curriculum, people felt very passionate about it.
Yeah.
36,000 people signed our petition within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. And the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, changed his mind. They now will stay and be enhanced. But of course then people said, okay, let's say we won that battle, but that was only half the battle. The other half of the battle was ensuring that there's a broader narrative about peoples of colour within the national curriculum. Not just the odd one or two. What about cultures? What about the ancient African cultures that were a prelude to the Egyptian cultures, the Greek cultures? So there's a link.
Yeah.
And our children ought to know these histories as part of their world history. Particularly when you consider that 25% of children in primary schools are minority from diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
Good for them, good for our education. But the fight that we won earlier in the year dissipated. We kept hold of a few to say we've got to carry on. We don't expect people to live and breathe it as we do. But you can still belong and support, even in a quiet way. You don't have to go to the streets to be effective.
Yeah. So that was an example of a petition.
Yep.
And we've talked about mentoring and shadowing and things. How do you view kind of social networking and new media tools?
Well, I mean, the social networking, along with the petition, went hand in hand.
Yeah.
I was reminded today, actually, by Marcus Garvey, who found himself with some 10 million supporters across America and Africa. No mobile phones, no Twitter, no Facebook. Word of mouth. We're not even close to these activists. And all we have to do is to look at our screen and get connected. Yes, it's a tool, but it's no substitute for the face-to-face, the emotional connection that you get from speaking to another human being and feeling the campaign.
Yeah.
You know, often I see these campaigns and I wonder how emotional they resonate beyond the 30-second read.
Yeah. So you talk about emotions there. Can you develop that a little bit? How the role you think they play in mobilising people or politicising people?
Sure. Yes. I mean, we're not advocating the kind of demagogue leaders, but we do want community leaders who inspire, who inform, who guide, and that's face to face. That is activism, organising, listening, engaging, lobbying.
Yeah.
It's emotional. It is, you know, to some level, you become a salesperson, but in the right way. You know, you're selling the idea of things can be better.
Yeah.
Planting the seed that together we can do this. That's a great sell.
Yeah.
First of all, you've got to believe it, and secondly, have the fortitude to deliver it, to confront the cynicism, and as a salesman or woman, you will get knocked back time and time and time again. The stronger ones will pick themselves up and you know, I used to be a salesman. I used to sell showers door to door.
So you're not being tough.
And you end up being tough. Back in the day, and we used to have the mantra: every no you get, you're nearer to a yes. And I feel that back with politics now, really. You just, and you know, I'm not saying that showers are rubbish, but this is much more profound.
Yeah.
Than the commodity I was selling back then.
Yeah, sure. Just thinking about the coalition again. Have you got any traction with them around their sort of localism and, you know, active citizenship sort of agenda?
It's a tough one. Not quite sure, no, would be the short answer. I mean, you know, I want local people to be empowered, but I worry that already empowered local groups can, and all populist local issues could ride roughshod over minority groups and minorities. And so I often don't see the nuanced debate around localism that ensures everybody will get a slice of the cake, coupled with the fact that there's less money. The opposite could be true.
And how is an organisation like OBV received within, you know, the coalition's ideas about big society? Because you're an overtly political group. Are you sort of squeezed out of that agenda, or?
I think racial equality is being squeezed at the moment. So, you know, and yet sometimes, I mean, the Cabinet Office have been very keen for us to help them with their conversation about voter registration. So it's a bit schizophrenic.
Mm.
You know, you have some elements that say we need you, and others that say we're done with you.
Yeah.
You know, the mood music is that we're almost in a post-racial world. Well, we're not. Sadly, I mean, our research, Usman, has shown that the gaps are getting wider, the poverty gaps, and a big tranche of those in poverty just happen to be black. So, in many respects, we need to redouble our efforts, stop losing the ground that we've got, and push forward again in making this a better place. Okay.
What sort of challenges do you find being an established organisation working within the political mainstream?
Sure. Actually, the challenges are the challenges are twinned with two factors really. That we've been around and become established. That people are disappointed when they see that we are 4 people and a bunch of volunteers. They would hope to see us as a big building with 65 people in. And so expectation about who we are is sometimes a bit underwhelming when they see us. The other challenge, of course, is our survival.
Yeah.
We have no right to automatic survival. But even when we've done good stuff and are doing good stuff, our survival is threatened.
Yeah.
That's a challenge, and that's a deep sadness, particularly when we think our work changes the world.
Yeah.
And is a beacon across Europe.
I imagine that must have been very difficult after the funding ran out for the mentoring and shadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I won't say bitterly disappointing, but it's deeply disappointing.
Yeah.
Because we know how it transforms people's lives, how it transforms the institution. Imagine for a second that a young black man or woman walks into a court, and in the past they would go, maybe driven by a black taxi driver, go through a black security guard, and walk into an establishment that is shockingly all white. And then some 15 years later, when they go in there and they look at the bench and they see a black man or woman sitting there dispensing justice, they think, okay, now I believe justice will be equitably dispensed. I'll be understood.
Yeah.
The fantastic transformations. And that's halted.
Yeah. Well, just to finish then, can I ask you about current priorities and future orientation?
Yes. Well, the current priorities is to survive, to keep our eye on the German election, is to be critical. The black vote could easily make the difference. What will be our policy priorities? What will be our ask? How can we mobilise 1 million black people to register to vote and to vote? How can we ensure that tackling race inequality is central to the next German election? We've got that in train. We hope that we can deliver, and it'll be a massive difference for everyone if we do.
Brilliant.
Good.
Thank you very much, Simon.
You're more than welcome.